All right, let's get right into it. Terminating a contract. It's pretty much the nuclear option in project management, right? It's a huge step with some serious consequences. So today, we're going to break down Clause 15 of the FIDIC Red Book 2017 so you can understand exactly what rules an employer has to play by when they're thinking about making that massive call.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the notice to correct, which is kind of like the first official warning shot. Then we'll explore the two main roads you can go down for termination, one if the contractor defaults, and a completely different one for the employer's own convenience. After that, we'll really dig into the financial aftermath, which is drastically different for each path, and we'll wrap it all up by looking at the key strategic thinking behind this whole decision.
I mean, let's be real. What actually happens when a huge project just starts to completely fall apart? Well, this is exactly why we have formal termination clauses. They give everyone a structured, contractual process to handle a crisis, to protect them from what would otherwise be a chaotic and incredibly expensive mess. And Clause 15 gives us that exact roadmap. When you look at Clause 15, it basically presents the employer with a major fork in the road. They can either terminate because the contractor messed up and defaulted on their obligations, or they can terminate just for their own convenience. And as you're about to see, the path they choose changes literally everything that comes next.
But hold on. Before an employer can even start thinking about termination, there's a really critical first step. It's a formal warning, and it's designed to give the project one last chance to get back on track. This is called the notice to correct. So, this notice to correct comes from subclause 15.1. It's an official instruction sent by the engineer telling the contractor to fix a specific problem. But here's the key thing you've got to remember. This isn't step one. This is a last resort. It should only be issued after all the informal chats, the site meetings, and the daily discussions have failed to solve the problem.
And you can see the power behind this right here. In the contract's own words, it gives the engineer this explicit authority. The notice itself has to be crystal clear about what the failure is and set a specific deadline for fixing it. This is the first official flag on the path to a potential termination for default.
Okay, so let's walk down that first path. What happens if the contractor gets that warning and just ignores it? Or maybe they commit an even more serious breach?
Well, subclause 15.2.1 lays out a whole list of specific triggers. You've got performance failures, like not complying with that notice to correct on a major issue, or just straight up abandoning the works. Then you have financial and legal breaches, like failing to provide the performance security, going bankrupt, or getting caught in fraudulent practices. Any one of these can be grounds for termination. Now, for most of those performance-related issues, there's a very specific two-notice process you have to follow. First, the employer sends a notice of intention to terminate. This is a warning shot that gives the contractor a 14-day window to finally fix the problem. If they don't, and only if they don't, can the employer then issue that second and final notice of termination.
But, and this is a big but, for the really serious breaches, there's a fast track. For things like illegal subcontracting, going bankrupt, or fraud, the contract basically says there's no fixing this. In those cases, the employer can skip that whole 14-day warning period and terminate the contract immediately with just one single notice.
All right, let's completely switch gears and look at the second path. This one has nothing to do with the contractor's failures. It's all about the employer's own strategy and choices.
This is a big one. Under subclause 15.5, the employer has the right to terminate the contract at any time simply for their convenience. Maybe the project lost its funding, maybe the market completely changed, or maybe there's a new CEO with a totally different plan. The reason doesn't have to be justified to the contractor, but believe me, the consequences of that decision are absolutely huge. And it comes with a massive catch, which you can see right here. Unlike a default termination, the employer can't just terminate and immediately bring in a new contractor to finish the job. They are legally blocked from continuing the work until the original contractor has been paid everything they are owed under the contract.
And the employer's obligations are immediate and very clear. They lose the right to use the contractor's designs and equipment, and, this is critical, they have to return the performance security. That is a night and day difference from a default termination. The termination itself only becomes official 28 days after the notice is given, or when that security is back in the contractor's hands, whichever happens later.
So, this all brings us to the most critical part of this whole decision, the money. Because the financial fallout from these two paths, well, they are worlds apart.
Just look at this breakdown. In a default termination,
The employer is in the driver's seat financially. They can call on the performance security, they can recover extra completion costs, and they can claim delay damages. They can even withhold payment until all those costs are sorted out. But with a convenience termination, the tables are completely turned. The employer eats the completion cost, the contractor gets paid for all the work they've done, and that performance security, it has to be returned right away.
And in that default scenario, the employer's power doesn't stop there. They actually get the right to use the contractor's own documents and equipment to get the project finished. They can even sell off equipment left on site to help cover any debts. It puts them in a really strong position.
Now, flip that around. For convenience termination, the process is much cleaner for the contractor. There's a clear set timeline. Once the contractor submits their final account, the employer has to pay the certified amount within 112 days. No ambiguity, just a clear deadline. So, let's pull all of this together. When you look at the whole picture, what are the big strategic takeaways? How does an employer actually make the final call between these two incredibly different options?
Ultimately, the choice really comes down to this. Termination for default is all about the contractor's failure. It's financially tough on them, and it lets the employer recover their costs, but it can be a long, drawn-out, and messy process. On the other hand, termination for convenience is the employer's right. It's much better for the contractor financially, but it gives the employer a much faster, cleaner, and less confrontational way to exit the contract.
And that really leaves us with the final strategic question, doesn't it? When a project is in crisis, it's not always about who's right or wrong. It's about the end goal. Which of these two paths, the punishing default route or the quick convenience exit, is actually the best way to protect the project and make sure its ultimate objectives are met? Well, that's the multimillion-dollar question every employer has to answer.